A 4-year-old homeless girl finds a millionaire being dragged into the woods by 5 desperate men, but she appears behind them and does something that shocks everyone. Comment and rate my story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The scream sliced through the humid afternoon air like a razor, echoing through the narrow streets of the bustling metropolis. The 4-year-old girl, with a frail appearance that made her seem only 2, huddled against the dirty wall of the alley where she had been sleeping for 3 nights. Her large, dark eyes watched 5 desperate men dragging a well-dressed man towards the car parked on the corner. The man being forcibly led away was unlike anyone she had seen on the streets. Tall, with the looks of a soap opera heartthrob, his dark hair was disheveled and his expensive dress shirt was torn at the sleeve. Even in his despair, there was something in his posture that betrayed wealth and power. The girl immediately recognized the type of person who possessed immense fortunes, the kind she saw in the luxury cars that passed along Main Street. "Please, I don't know where the money is," the handsome man shouted as he was pushed brutally into the vehicle. "You're making a mistake." One of the kidnappers, a burly man with scars on his face, laughed contemptuously. "Mistake? The only mistake was trusting you, boss. Our company closed because of you. Our families are suffering while you live in your luxurious mansion." The girl, driven by a curiosity that always got her into dangerous situations, silently emerged from her hiding place. Her bare feet made no noise as she followed the car at a safe distance. She had learned on the streets that surviving meant knowing when to observe and when to act, and something about this situation aroused her instinct that big things were about to happen. The vehicle drove through increasingly deserted streets until it reached the outskirts of the city, where dense woods began to dominate the landscape. The girl managed to stay hidden among the trees, her small stature being an unexpected advantage. She watched the men drag the millionaire into a small clearing, where they tied him tightly to a thick trunk. "You have 1 hour to tell us where you hid the company's money," said the leader of the group, a lean man with cold eyes. "We know you diverted the resources before firing us. Our families are in misery while you accumulate wealth." The businessman, even tied up and clearly frightened, maintained a dignity that impressed the girl. "I swear I don't know what you're talking about. If there's missing money, someone else is responsible." "Liar!" shouted another of the men, punching the trunk near the prisoner's face. "We saw the records. You transferred a fortune to secret accounts days before letting us go." The girl watched everything from behind a large tree, her small heart beating fast. There was something familiar about the situation, something that echoed confusing memories of her own difficult life. During her months living on the streets, she had witnessed many injustices, but this was different. There was a complexity that her sharp mind, despite her young age, was able to perceive. It was then that she noticed something that the adults had not seen. A few feet from the clearing, half buried among dry leaves, was a brown leather briefcase. The girl had passed there a few days before, looking for a place to sleep, and clearly remembered seeing men in suits burying that object during the early morning hours. Without thinking about the consequences, the child came out of her hiding place and walked slowly towards the men. Her fragile and innocent appearance made everyone stop talking when they saw her approaching. "Are you looking for money?" she asked in her childish voice, pointing towards where the briefcase was. "I saw where they hid it." The silence that followed was absolute. The 5 men looked at the girl as if she were an apparition, while the millionaire tied up watched her with a mixture of amazement and hope. No one expected a child to appear in that isolated place, much less offering information about a hidden treasure. The leader of the group crouched down in front of the girl, his suspicious eyes studying every detail of her childish face. "What's a kid doing out here alone? And how do you know about hidden money?" The girl showed no fear, only pointed again to the area where she had seen the men bury the briefcase. I sleep around here sometimes. I saw some men in nice clothes digging there 3 nights ago. They were talking about hiding money from a company. The men exchanged glances with growing interest. If the child was telling the truth, perhaps they would finally find what they were looking for. The tied-up millionaire watched the scene with an expression of genuine confusion, as if he really didn't know what it was all about. "Show us," ordered the man with the scars, gesturing for the girl to lead them. The little girl walked with determined steps through the woods, followed by the 5 adults and leaving the businessman tied to the trunk. Her memories of the streets had developed in her an impressive ability to remember details and locations, essential skills for surviving alone. A few minutes later, she stopped near an area where the earth seemed to have been recently disturbed. "It's here." They dug deep and then covered it with leaves. The men began to dig frantically with their hands and branches they found. After a few minutes of intense work, the metallic sound of something solid being hit echoed through the forest. It was indeed a brown leather briefcase, heavy and locked with a padlock. "I can't believe it," muttered one of them, as they pulled the object out of the hole. The girl was right. With a large stone, they broke the padlock and opened the briefcase. What they saw left them speechless. Stacks and more stacks of money, organized in neat bundles. It was an impressive amount, enough to support several families for years. "There must be millions here," said the leader with a choked voice. "It's much more than we imagined was stolen." The girl watched everything with her big eyes, processing each reaction of the adults. There was something strangely familiar about the situation, as if she had witnessed similar scenes before. Her childhood memory held confusing fragments of situations involving money and desperate people. They returned to where the millionaire remained tied up. This time, the men watched him with a different expression, less hostile and more confused. If the money was really buried in the woods, maybe he wasn't the culprit they thought he was. "Did you know this money was here?" asked the leader, showing some bundles found in the briefcase. The businessman vehemently shook his head. "I've never seen this money in my life. Look, you were my employees for years. You know my character. If there's someone diverting resources from the company, it's not me." The girl approached the tied-up man, studying his face with the curiosity typical of a child. There was something in his eyes that she recognized. The same deep pain she saw in the mirror when she found reflective surfaces on the streets. It was the expression of someone who had lost something very important. "You look sad," she said simply, lightly touching the man's arm. "Like me when I think about my mom." The millionaire looked at the child with surprise. Even in his desperate situation, something in the innocence of that girl touched a sensitive part of his heart. "Where's your mom, little one?" "I don't know. The mean woman who takes care of me says she's gone and will never come back." The former employees watched the interaction with growing discomfort. The child's presence had completely changed the dynamics of the situation. They were not just kidnappers and victim. Now there was an innocent witness who somehow had solved the mystery that tormented them. "What if he really doesn't know anything about the money?" muttered one of the men to the leader. "The girl proved the money was hidden here. Maybe we were wrong about who the culprit is." The leader remained silent for long minutes, looking alternately at the money, at the prisoner, and at the girl. The situation had become much more complex than they had planned. "Are you sure you saw men in suits burying this?" he asked the girl. "I am. They were wearing clothes similar to his," she said, pointing to the millionaire. "But they were older. One of them had grey hair and spoke very loudly." The businessman frowned. "Grey hair. What else do you remember about those men?" The girl closed her eyes, concentrating. The oldest one had a scar on his right hand. "And they were talking about a company. Something about getting rid of evidence before anyone found out." A chill ran down the millionaire's spine. He knew only one person who matched that description. His oldest partner, a man he trusted blindly. The possibility of being betrayed by someone so close was devastating, but it was beginning to make sense with the recent events in the company. 3 months had passed since that day in the woods, and the millionaire's life had changed in an unimaginable way. After the former employees released him and took the money as compensation for unpaid wages, he couldn't get the image of that fragile girl who had saved his life out of his mind. Discovering that his trusted partner was behind the diversion of resources was a devastating blow, but not as much as realizing that a child lived abandoned on the streets while he isolated himself in his luxurious mansion. The property where he lived was in the quiet outskirts of the city, an imposing construction surrounded by well-kept gardens and high walls that separated him from the outside world. Since losing his wife in an accident 2 years earlier, that house had become more of a gilded prison than a home. Each room echoed painful memories. Each corridor whispered reminders of a happiness that seemed to belong to another life. It was during one of his melancholic walks through the garden that he saw her again. The girl was outside the walls, watching the birds that flew freely among the trees. Her hair was cleaner than in the woods, but her clothes were still rags that barely covered her small and fragile body. "How did you find me?" he asked, approaching the gate. "I followed you that day," she replied with the brutal honesty of children. "I wanted to know where rich people like you live. It's very pretty here." The millionaire opened the gate, inviting her in. There was something in the presence of that child that calmed the constant pain in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced since his wife's departure. It was as if her innocence brought light to the dark corners of his tormented soul. "Are you hungry?" he asked, watching how she admired every detail of the garden with wide eyes. The girl nodded shyly. For days she had eaten only leftovers she found in the trash, and the idea of a proper meal seemed like an impossible dream. He led her to the spacious kitchen, where he prepared a simple sandwich and served a large glass of milk. While she ate voraciously, he watched her every movement, every expression on her small face. There was a brilliant intelligence in her eyes that contrasted drastically with her appearance as an abandoned child. It was as if she processed and analyzed everything around her with a disturbing maturity for someone so young. "Why did you help me that day?" he asked finally. The girl stopped eating and looked directly into his eyes. "Because you seemed as lost as me, and lost people need to help each other." Those simple words hit the millionaire's heart like a well-aimed arrow. He had spent 2 years drowning in self-pity and guilt, unable to move on after the tragedy that destroyed his world. But here was a child who faced unimaginable difficulties and still found the strength to help others. The girl's visits became frequent. She appeared at the most unexpected moments, always with that mysterious ability to show up when he most needed company. They talked about simple things, the birds in the garden, the clouds in the sky, stories she invented about the colorful flowers. For him, those moments represented the only hours of peace amidst the torment of his solitary existence. During these conversations, he began to notice something extraordinary about the girl. She remembered every detail of previous conversations, every word they had exchanged, every gesture he had made. It was as if her mind was a perfect library where nothing was lost or confused. "You have an incredible memory," he commented one day, after she recited word for word a story he had told weeks before. "I need to remember everything," she replied naturally. "On the streets, forgetting can mean not surviving. That's why I keep every important thing I see or hear." It was then that he began to suspect that there was much more behind that child than appeared. The way she observed, analyzed, and memorized everything suggested an intelligence that went far beyond her apparent age. But they were just vague suspicions, small details that accumulated in his mind without forming a clear picture. What he didn't know was that, elsewhere in the city, a 35-year-old woman watched every movement of the girl with growing interest. The cruel stepmother had noticed the child's prolonged absences and decided to investigate where she went during those periods. Addicted to gambling and always looking for new ways to get money, it didn't take her long to discover that her source of income had found a lonely millionaire. "So the little idiot found a big fish," she muttered to herself as she watched the luxurious mansion through cheap binoculars. "This could be very useful to me." The stepmother's calculating mind was already formulating plans on how to exploit that situation. If a rich man had become fond of the girl, he would certainly be willing to pay well to keep that source of company available. It was a golden opportunity that she couldn't waste. Meanwhile, in the mansion, the millionaire and the girl shared another moment of genuine connection. He had begun to talk about his late wife, something he couldn't do with anyone else, not even his expensive psychologists. "She would have liked you," he said, looking at a photograph on the living room table. "She always wanted to have children, but we never had the chance." The girl studied the photo with her characteristic attention. "She looks kind and sad, like you." "Sad? Why do you say that?" "Her eyes have the same shadow as yours, as if they were holding a heavy secret." That observation surprised him deeply. How could a 4-year-old child perceive such subtle nuances in a simple photograph? It was further evidence that there were complex layers in that young mind that he still couldn't fully understand. The first blackmail arrived on a sunny Tuesday morning when the millionaire was having coffee alone at his dining table. The phone rang insistently until he answered, hearing a rough female voice on the other end of the line. "I know the girl has been visiting your house," said the cruel stepmother without preamble, "and I know you've become fond of her. That can continue, but it will come at a price." The businessman felt a chill in his stomach. "Who are you? What do you want?" "I'm the child's legal guardian, and I want $5,000 in cash by tomorrow, or she'll never show up at your door again." "You can't do that. She's a child, not merchandise." "I can do whatever I want. I'm all she has in this world, and if you want to keep playing happy family, you're going to pay for the privilege." The call was ended abruptly, leaving the millionaire with the phone in his trembling hands. The idea of losing the only source of peace he had found in years was unbearable. That girl had become an emotional anchor that prevented him from drowning completely in his depression. When she appeared that afternoon, as she always did, he tried to act normally. But there was a tension in the air that the child immediately noticed, with her sharp sensitivity. "You're worried," she observed, sitting down on the garden bench next to him. "Did someone hurt you?" "It's complicated," he replied, struggling to find appropriate words for a child. "Some bad people want to stop me from being your friend." The girl's eyes darkened with a disturbing seriousness. "The mean woman who takes care of me found out where I've been, didn't she?" The child's insight surprised him once again. "How do you know?" "Because she always finds out everything, and she always turns good things into ways to get money." The girl paused, staring at the flowers in the garden. "She's done this before with other people who were kind to me." "Other people?" "A lady who gave me food near the park, a man who fixed broken toys. She always showed up, and then they disappeared from my life." The millionaire's heart clenched as he realized the pattern of manipulation that child had repeatedly suffered. It was a cruel form of control that transformed every gesture of kindness into an opportunity for extortion. "I won't let that happen this time," he promised, but his voice carried more hope than certainty. In the following days, he paid the first amount demanded. Then came a second demand, larger than the first. Then a third, always with the implicit threat that the girl would disappear from his life if he refused to pay. The businessman, desperate to maintain that source of emotional relief, began to transfer increasingly large amounts from his personal accounts. His portfolio of stocks and investments allowed him to sustain those expenses for a while, but the situation was becoming unsustainable. It was during this period of financial and emotional pressure that he began to notice strange details about the girl. She asked very specific questions about his routine, about the people who worked in his house, about his habits and preferences. Initially, he attributed this curiosity to the natural thirst for knowledge of children, but gradually he realized that there was a pattern in the information she collected. "Why do you want to know so much about my housekeeper?" he asked one day, after she had asked the 10th question about the schedules and activities of the lady who took care of his house. "Just curious," she replied, but for the first time avoided looking directly into his eyes. The housekeeper was a 60-year-old woman who had worked for him for a decade. Reliable, discreet, and efficient, she had been a constant presence during the most difficult moments after the loss of his wife. The idea that someone might be investigating his employees made him deeply uncomfortable. This suspicion intensified when he realized that the girl demonstrated knowledge about details of his private life that he had never shared with her. Small things, like knowing that he kept important documents in a safe in the office, or that he received business calls always at 10 in the morning. "How do you know about these things?" he questioned, beginning to feel a growing unease. "I pay attention to everything," was her evasive answer. But there was something more disturbing than her sharp observations. The girl began to casually mention information about other wealthy families in the area. Details about their houses, their cars, their habits, as if she had visited them all in the same way that she visited his mansion. "Do you know the family who lives in the big house near the lake?" she asked one afternoon, accurately describing a property that he knew well. "I do." "Why?" "They have a very beautiful dog, and the man always stays in the office late at night counting money." The millionaire felt a chill. How could a 4-year-old child know about the nocturnal habits of a businessman who lived miles away? Unless... "Have you visited their house?" "Sometimes I walk around there," she replied with an innocence that now sounded forced. That night, alone in his mansion, he began to connect the dots of a disturbing reality. The girl was not just an abandoned child who had found refuge in his company. She was being systematically used to collect information about wealthy families, probably by the same woman who was blackmailing him. The discovery was devastating. The only person who had brought light into his dark life was, consciously or not, participating in a scheme to exploit his emotional vulnerability. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than any physical wound. But there was something even more disturbing in this revelation. The way the girl collected and processed information suggested an intelligence and an ability to observe that went far beyond what was normal for her age. It was as if she were a little spy, trained to extract secrets from the people who became fond of her. The question that tormented him now was whether she knew exactly what she was doing, or whether she was just an innocent tool in the hands of manipulative adults. The answer to that question would determine how he would deal with the situation from then on. The confrontation that the millionaire had carefully planned never came to happen in the way he had imagined. The morning after his disturbing discoveries, he was surprised by a call from his private attorney, bringing news that completely changed the course of his suspicions. "We managed to track the money diverted from the company," said the attorney with a tense voice. "The situation is much more complex than we imagined. Your partner was not acting alone." The businessman straightened up in the armchair in his office. "What did you find out?" "There is a network of people involved in the scheme, including your housekeeper." The world seemed to spin around him. The woman he had trusted for 10 years, who had consoled his pain after the loss of his wife, who knew every intimate detail of his personal life, was involved in the conspiracy against him. How is that possible? She had been providing detailed information about your routine, your investments, your emotional vulnerabilities. That's how your partner knew exactly when and how to divert the resources without being detected immediately. The revelation brought a painful understanding of how he had been systematically betrayed by people in whom he placed absolute trust. But it also shed new light on the girl's behavior. Perhaps she was not the only child being used to collect information. Perhaps the entire espionage network was more extensive than he had imagined. When the child appeared that afternoon, as she always did, he observed her with different eyes. Every question she asked, every detail she observed, every casual piece of information she mentioned took on a new meaning in his mind. "The lady with the grey hair is gone," she commented, referring to the housekeeper. "You found out she was telling your secrets to bad people. How do you know that?" "Because I saw her talking to the mean woman's brother. He's a big, scary man who always comes to get money." The girl sat on the garden bench, her little legs swinging in the air. "He told the mean woman to use me to find out things about you." The millionaire was speechless. The girl knew exactly what was happening and had decided to reveal the truth on her own. "Are you angry with me?" she asked in a small voice. "Should I be? I did things that hurt you, even though I didn't want to hurt you." Tears began to run down her cheeks. "But I didn't want to stay away from you. You're the only person who makes me feel safe." It was a moment of raw and painful truth. The child had been forced to choose between her own survival and loyalty to someone who cared about her. And now she was confessing everything, taking risks that a 4-year-old shouldn't have to face. The millionaire looked at the girl crying on the garden bench and felt something break definitively inside his chest. It wasn't anger or disappointment, but a painful understanding that both were victims of a cruel system that exploited their deepest vulnerabilities. "You didn't hurt me," he said finally, sitting down next to her. "You're just a child trying to survive. The adults are the ones who failed you." The girl raised her tear-reddened eyes. "But I knew I was doing something wrong. I knew the questions I asked weren't just curiosity. And even so, you told me the truth. That shows who you really are." At that moment, he made a decision that would change everything. It didn't matter how much money those people demanded. It didn't matter what threats they made. He wouldn't abandon that child to her own fate. "We'll solve this together," he promised. "But I need you to tell me everything you know about these people. Every detail could be important." The girl nodded seriously. "The mean woman's brother is called Boss by the others. He's 40 years old and controls all the money she gets. They work with more people." "What kind of people?" "People who take care of houses, like your housekeeper. People who work in banks. People who drive cars for rich families." The girl paused, organizing her memories with the precision of an adult. "They have a list with the names of people who have a lot of money and are alone or sad." The businessman felt a chill run down his spine. It was a much more sophisticated operation than he had imagined, an organized network that specifically targeted vulnerable and wealthy people. "How do you know about the list?" "Because I saw it. The boss always carries a black notebook where he writes information about the families. It has pictures, addresses, and things that make people sad." "Can you remember other names on the list?" The girl closed her eyes, accessing her extraordinary photographic memory. "The family by the lake who has the dog, an old man who lives alone in a house with lots of plants, a woman who always wears black clothes and cries a lot." Each name she mentioned corresponded to people he knew from the social circle of the local elite. All of them had experienced recent losses or faced emotionally fragile situations that made them perfect targets for manipulation. "How long has this been going on?" "As long as I can remember. The mean woman has always used me for this. Before you, I visited other houses." The girl's voice became lower. "Some people were very kind to me. Then the mean woman would show up and they would get scared. They never let me in again." It was a pattern of systematic abuse that had destroyed multiple genuine connections in that child's life. Every time she found someone who showed true affection, that source of affection was transformed into a tool of extortion. "What about your real mom? Are you sure she was taken away?" The girl's eyes lit up with surprising intensity. I remember a lot more things than the mean woman thinks. I remember my mom arguing with the boss about money. I remember him saying she would be committed to a place far away if she didn't cooperate. Committed to a place for people who get sick in the head. But my mom wasn't sick. She just didn't want to use me the way they wanted. The picture was becoming clearer and more disturbing with each revelation. The girl's biological mother had refused to participate in the scheme and was forcibly removed, probably through forced commitment based on falsified documents. Do you know where your mum is now? I don't know the exact place, but I overheard the boss talking on the phone about a clinic in the next town, one where they commit people against their will. The millionaire felt a mixture of horror and determination grow in his chest. If that child was right, her mother was being held prisoner in an institution, unable to fight for her own daughter. Is there something else you haven't told me? The girl hesitated for a long moment, as if she were making an important decision. I have something hidden, something that can help you stop these bad people. What kind of thing? A tiny recorder that I found in the trash. I managed to fix it, and I use it to record important conversations. Her eyes gleamed with cunning. I have recordings of the boss talking about you and about other people. The revelation left the businessman speechless. That 4-year-old child had been collecting evidence against her own captors, using an intelligence and planning that defied any normal understanding of child development. Where did you hide the recorder? In a place only I know. In a hole under a bridge, inside a can that doesn't get wet. The girl stood up from the bench with sudden determination. I can get it for you, but if I do, I can't go back to the mean woman's house anymore. They'll find out I betrayed them. It was the moment of truth. The child was offering evidence that could destroy the entire criminal network, but at the cost of her own safety. If she brought those recordings, there would be no turning back. Are you sure you want to do this? He asked. I want my mom to come back. And I want you to not have to be afraid of these people anymore. The girl looked directly into his eyes. But I'll only do it if you promise me one thing. What? That you won't abandon me after. That we'll stay together until we find my mom. The request was both touching and devastating. A 4-year-old was taking enormous risks based only on the promise of an adult she had barely known for a few months. I promise, he said, knowing that those words would change his life forever. No matter what happens, we'll face it together. That night, after the girl had gone to retrieve the hidden recorder, the millionaire prepared to listen to evidence that could not only save his fortune, but reveal much darker secrets about the network that had infiltrated their lives. What he didn't know was that the recordings contained revelations that would connect his own personal tragedy in ways he could never have imagined. The girl returned the following dawn, soaked by the drizzle that fell over the city. Her clothes were stained with mud, and her small fingers trembled with cold as she held a rusty can against her chest. The millionaire greeted her at the back door of the mansion, immediately wrapping her in a warm blanket. Did you get it? He asked, observing the determination that still shone in the child's tired eyes. I did, but it was hard to get there without anyone seeing me. The girl opened the can carefully, revealing a small digital recorder that appeared to have been repaired with duct tape and small wires. I recorded a lot of conversations. Some will make you very angry. They went to the office, where the businessman prepared hot chocolate while the girl organized the recordings in order of importance. There was a disturbing maturity in the way she handled the evidence, as if she were an experienced detective instead of a 4-year-old. This one here is the most important, she said, pointing to a specific file. It's about your wife. The millionaire's heart stopped for a moment. My wife? How is that possible? Listen for yourself. The gruff voice of the man the girl called boss filled the office through the small speakers of the device. He was talking to someone about a job completed and a problem permanently eliminated. The accident was perfect, the recording said. No one will suspect the brakes were sabotaged. The widower will be too devastated to investigate anything. And the company's money? Asked a second voice that the businessman recognized as belonging to his former partner. With him emotionally destroyed, we'll have months to transfer everything. By the time he realizes it, it will be too late. The millionaire's world collapsed once again. His wife had not lost her life in a tragic accident, but in a calculated and cold murder. The accident that had tormented him with guilt for 2 years had been an orchestrated execution to facilitate the theft of his fortune. "There's more," the girl said softly, watching the tears that streamed down his face. "About my mom, too." The next recording was even more disturbing. The boss was arguing with the cruel stepmother about how to solve the problem of the girl's mother, who was refusing to collaborate with the scheme. "She threatens to tell everything to the authorities," complained the stepmother's voice. "She says she won't let us use her daughter to rob people." "Then let's commit her. I have contacts in a private clinic that accepts patients without asking too many questions." Once inside, she becomes just another crazy person that no one believes. What about the documents? They're already being provided. False medical certificates, a history of mental instability, everything we need to justify the forced commitment. The girl held the millionaire's hands as he processed the magnitude of the conspiracy. They weren't just opportunistic criminals, but a sophisticated organization capable of forging documents, bribing doctors, and eliminating people who became obstacles. "How many families have they done this to?" he asked with a hoarse voice. "Many," replied the girl, switching to another recording. "This one is about the lady who always wears black clothes." The conversation revealed how they had faked the departure of the woman's only son, making her believe that he had moved to another country, when in reality he was being held captive until she transferred all her family inheritance. Recording after recording exposed a network of horror that stretched throughout the region. Destroyed families, stolen fortunes. People disappeared or killed to facilitate elaborate embezzlement schemes. "How did you manage to record all this without them noticing?" asked the businessman, amazed by the child's courage and intelligence. "They think I'm too small to understand what they're saying, and I always stay very quiet when they talk about work." The girl paused, her eyes reflecting a painful wisdom. "I learned that adults speak important truths when they forget that children exist." The millionaire got up and walked to the window, observing the garden where so many innocent conversations had taken place between them. Now he understood that that child had been collecting evidence for months, maybe years, waiting for the right moment to act. "You planned all this from the beginning, didn't you?" he asked. "Since that day in the woods when you helped me?" "Not exactly. But when I saw you tied to that tree, I realized that you were also being hurt by the same bad people who hurt my family." The girl approached him. "And I thought that maybe 2 hurt people could help each other. Why didn't you tell me the truth before?" "Because I needed to be sure that you were different. Many adults are kind at first, but then change when they find out about problems." The brutal honesty of the child was both touching and devastating. She had tested his loyalty and commitment before trusting him with information that could destroy lives. "What do we do now?" he asked. "Now we save my mom and punish the bad people," she replied with a simplicity that contrasted with the complexity of the situation. "But first, you need to know something very important." "What?" The girl hesitated, as if she were gathering courage to reveal something even more shocking. "Your wife didn't leave just because of the money. There's something else, something that made her special to these bad people." "Special how?" "She found out about other families who were being robbed. She was collecting evidence to report everything." The girl's voice became lower. "She was like me. She paid attention to details that other adults ignored." The millionaire felt as if the ground were disappearing beneath his feet. His wife had been murdered not only to facilitate the theft of his fortune, but to silence an investigation that could have saved dozens of other families. "Is there a recording about that too?" he asked, fearing the answer. There is, but that one is the hardest to listen to. The girl held his hand tightly. Are you sure you want to hear it? He nodded, knowing that he needed to know the whole truth, no matter how painful it was. What the next recording revealed would change not only his understanding of his wife's death, but the entire extent of the conspiracy that had destroyed so many lives. The most devastating recording began with the familiar and loved voice of his deceased wife. The millionaire clung to the desk in the office, his legs trembling as he heard again that voice that had been silenced forever 2 years ago. I need to document everything I've discovered, she said, in a recording that had clearly been made in secret. If something happens to me, someone needs to know the truth about this organization. The voice continued, revealing how she had noticed a strange pattern among acquaintances in the local elite. Wealthy families who suddenly faced personal tragedies followed by inexplicable financial problems. I've identified at least 12 cases in the last 3 years. They always start with infiltration through domestic employees or service providers. Then they exploit emotional vulnerabilities to extract information and money. The millionaire closed his eyes, recalling how his wife had tried to talk to him about her suspicions several times. He was so absorbed in business and problems with his partner that he hadn't paid due attention to her investigations. I've discovered that they use children to access houses where adults would suspect strangers, the recording continued. One little girl in particular appears in several of the affected families, always a few weeks before the problems start. The businessman's heart raced. His wife had found out about the girl long before she appeared in his life. Did that mean the entire encounter in the woods had been planned? He looked at the child, who watched his reactions with intense attention. Did you know that my wife was investigating you? Not at the time, she replied honestly. I only found out later when I heard the conversations about how she was dangerous to their scheme. The recording continued, revealing details about how his wife had managed to partially infiltrate the organization, pretending to be a potential victim while collecting evidence. I've managed to identify the leader of the operation, a 40-year-old man who calls himself boss. He has connections with corrupt doctors, registry officers, and even people in financial institutions. Did my mum help your wife? The girl asked suddenly. The millionaire paused the recording. How so? My mom was always very smart. If your wife was investigating the bad people, maybe they worked together. The possibility hadn't occurred to him, but it made sense. If the girl's mother had refused to collaborate with the scheme, perhaps it was because she was on his wife's side in the investigation. He resumed the recording, and his wife's voice confirmed the child's suspicions. I've managed to gain an unexpected ally, a young mother who was being forced to use her little daughter for espionage. She wants to get out of this life, but she needs protection for herself and the child. We've arranged a plan to expose the entire operation. She'll continue pretending to collaborate while passing me information from the inside. When we have enough evidence, we'll go to the authorities together. The millionaire stopped the recording, processing the revelation. His wife and the girl's mother had been partners in an investigation that cost them both their lives. One murdered, the other disappeared. Your mom risked everything to help my wife, he said to the child. And your wife risked everything to save other families, she replied. They were brave, but they couldn't finish what they started. The girl's eyes shone with determination. Not yet, but we can finish it for them. The last part of the recording revealed his wife's final plan to expose the organization. She had scheduled a meeting with an investigative journalist to deliver all the evidence, but never made it to the meeting because the accident happened the night before. If something happens to me before I can deliver this information, her voice said, I've hidden copies of everything in a safe place. Only 2 people know where, me and my investigation partner. The millionaire looked at the girl. Do you know where your mom hid the evidence? She showed me a special place before she was taken away. She said it was for emergencies. The child paused, accessing her precise memories. It's in a box buried under the big tree in the city's Central Park. Is it still there? I think so. No one else knows about that place. The businessman got up, feeling for the first time in 2 years that he had a clear purpose. It wasn't just about recovering his stolen fortune or saving the girl's mother. It was about completing the mission that his wife had begun, honoring the sacrifice she had made, trying to protect other families. We're going to get that evidence tomorrow, he decided. But first you need to be safe. If they find out you brought me the recordings... They already know I didn't come home last night, the girl said calmly. The mean woman must be furious, and the boss will want to find me. Then you stay here. This house has enough security to protect us while we plan our next move. That night, while the girl slept in the guest room of the mansion, the millionaire stayed awake in the office, listening to the recordings repeatedly. Every word of his deceased wife was a stab of pain and remorse, but also a source of renewed determination. He had failed to heed her warnings when she was alive. He had let his obsession with business blind him to the danger she faced. But now he had a second chance to do the right thing. The phone rang at 3 a.m. It was the cruel stepmother, with a voice full of hate and despair. I know she's there, she said without preamble, and I know she brought things that she shouldn't have brought. I don't know what you're talking about, he lied. Don't play with me. That girl stole very important things, things that can destroy powerful people. The voice became more threatening. You have until noon tomorrow to return her and everything she took, or the consequences will be worse than you can imagine. The call was ended, leaving the millionaire certain that the war had officially begun. They knew about the recordings, they knew their evidence was compromised, and they would do anything to regain control of the situation. But this time, he was not alone and helpless as he had been in previous months. He had unexpected allies, devastating evidence, and more importantly, a reason to fight that went beyond his own survival. The morning brought with it a discovery that would change everything once again. While the millionaire was preparing breakfast for the girl, she made a casual observation that made him freeze. The man who takes care of your garden isn't who you think he is, she said, looking out the kitchen window. What do you mean? He didn't come to cut the grass today. He came to spy. The child pointed to a distant figure among the trees. And there are other men hidden near the back fence. The businessman ran to the window and saw what the girl had noticed with her sharp attention to detail. The man who had been taking care of his gardens for 3 years was positioned strategically to observe the house, and there was suspicious movement in several places around the property. They've surrounded the house, he muttered, feeling the panic grow in his chest. Not on all sides, the girl corrected with surprising calm. There's a place they don't know about, an old tunnel that connects your wine cellar with the neighboring property. What tunnel? I've lived here for 5 years and never knew about any tunnel. The child smiled for the first time in days. I explore places that adults ignore. I found the entrance when I was playing in the cellar last week. She led him to the cellar, where she moved some boxes of wine to reveal a disguised wooden door in the wall. Behind it, a narrow tunnel stretched into the darkness. It was built a long time ago when this house belonged to people who needed to hide, the girl explained. It comes out in an abandoned house on the other side of the hill. The millionaire was impressed once again with that child's ability to observe and explore. She knew his own property better than he did. We can use this to get to the park and get the evidence that your mum hid, she suggested. It's too dangerous. If they see us, they won't see us if we're smart. The girl was already organizing the few belongings she had brought. But we have to go now, before they find out about the tunnel too. They prepared quickly, taking a flashlight, the original recordings, and enough money for emergencies. The tunnel was cramped and damp, forcing the millionaire to crawl for most of the journey, but the girl moved easily through the confined space. They emerged into a truly abandoned house, covered in vegetation and clearly uninhabited for years. The property was in an isolated area of the city, away from the prying eyes that might be watching the mansion. "How did you know about this place?" he asked, brushing off the tunnel grime. "I know a lot of hidden spots. When you live on the streets, you learn to find places no one else knows exist." They navigated through the city, using indirect routes and alleys the girl knew intimately. Her ability to move unseen was impressive, honed by years of surviving alone in a hostile urban environment. The city's central park was moderately busy with morning joggers and playing children. The tree the girl had mentioned was an ancient oak at the center of a grassy area, set back from the main paths. "Your mom chose well," the businessman commented. "Public enough not to seem suspicious, but secluded enough to dig without being noticed." The girl knelt at the base of the tree, counting steps from a specific branch with the precision of a mental map. "Here," she finally said, marking a spot on the ground. They used twigs and their bare hands to dig, taking turns to avoid attracting attention. After 20 minutes of careful excavation, they unearthed a metal box wrapped in plastic. Inside were documents, photographs, digital and physical recordings, and a handwritten letter from the girl's mother. "My dearest daughter," the millionaire read softly, "if you're reading this, it means something terrible has happened to me. But it also means you found someone you can trust to help you." The letter continued, explaining how the girl's mother had infiltrated the criminal organization, collecting evidence for months before discovering her own sister, the mean woman, was involved from the start. "Your aunt isn't a victim of circumstance," the letter revealed. "She's one of the founders of this operation. She was the one who suggested using children for infiltration because no one suspects a small, seemingly abandoned child." The millionaire looked at the girl, who absorbed every word with a serious expression. "Your own aunt created the scheme that forced you to live on the streets." "I already suspected," said Ember. "She never acted like someone who really cared about me. She was always more interested in what I could find out about other people." The documents revealed the full scope of the operation. Dozens of families affected, millions of dollars stolen through elaborate schemes, and a network including doctors, attorneys, title company officers, and even people in banking institutions. But the most shocking discovery came in a recording the girl's mother had secretly made during an organization meeting. "The next target is perfect," said the boss's voice. "A wealthy businessman with marital problems. We'll eliminate the wife first, leave him emotionally destroyed, then use the girl to get close." "And if he recovers faster than we expect?" asked another voice. "He won't. We'll make sure he blames himself for his wife's departure." Rich, guilty men are the easiest targets there are. The millionaire felt nauseous as he realized he had been chosen as a target long before any of these events had happened. His wife's murder, his isolation, even meeting Ember in the woods. It had all been orchestrated from the beginning. "They planned our whole life 2 years ago," he said hoarsely. "They planned your life," Ember corrected. "They only used my life. But that also means they made a mistake." "What mistake?" "They never imagined a kid they forced to spy could also be collecting evidence against them." Ember's eyes gleamed with determination. "Now, we have everything we need to destroy them." But as they stood to leave the park, they saw black cars approaching from all directions. They had been found, and this time there was no secret tunnel to escape. "Run!" the millionaire shouted, grabbing Ember's hand. But it was too late. Men in suits emerged from the cars, quickly surrounding them. The boss himself emerged from the lead vehicle, his cold eyes fixed on the evidence box the businessman still held. "The game's over," he said in an icy voice. "Now you'll find out what happens to people who interfere with our business." The confrontation in the park lasted only a few minutes, but it felt like an eternity. The boss approached them with calculated steps, followed by 6 men who blocked every escape route. The millionaire instinctively pulled Ember behind him, shielding her with his body. "Hand over the box, and maybe we'll let you leave with all your limbs intact," the leader of the organization said, extending his hand with false courtesy. "Never," the businessman replied, clutching the box to his chest. Then something happened that no one expected. Ember stepped forward, emerging from behind the millionaire with a strangely calm expression on her face. "Uncle," she said, addressing the boss, "did you really think I was as naive as I appeared?" The man frowned, confused by the sudden change in the child's demeanor. "What are you talking about, kid?" "I'm talking about the other things I recorded, things you don't know exist." Ember smiled with a maturity that made all the adults present uncomfortable. "Including last night's conversation about where you're holding my mother prisoner." The boss paled slightly. "Impossible. You were with us when we had that conversation." "I was, indeed, sleeping on the floor of the living room, as always." Ember's voice took on an almost amused tone. "But you forgot that I haven't slept soundly in years, and that I always have my tiny recorder with me." She pulled a second device from her pocket, smaller than the first, which she had kept hidden all this time. "This recording has already been sent to 3 different journalists through a system I programmed at an internet cafe. If anything happens to me or to him," she pointed to the millionaire, "everything will be automatically released in 6 hours." The revelation visibly shook the boss. "You're lying. A 4-year-old doesn't know how to use complex technology." "A normal 4-year-old doesn't. But I'm not a normal child, am I?" Ember tilted her head, studying the expression of growing panic on the man's face. "You've spent years training me to observe, memorize, and manipulate. Never thought I might use those skills against you." The millionaire watched the scene with a mix of admiration and horror. The child he had tried to protect was revealing layers of intelligence and planning that defied any normal understanding of childhood development. "Besides," Ember continued, "you made a fatal mistake last night." "What mistake?" "You revealed the location of the clinic where my mother is being held, and the names of the doctors who are collaborating with you." Her eyes gleamed with cold triumph. "Information that is already in the hands of the authorities." The boss made a sharp gesture to his men, but Ember raised her small hand in a stopping motion. "I'm not finished." Her voice took on a tone that made all the adults present shudder. "Do you want to know how a 4-year-old managed to orchestrate all this?" "Spit it out," the leader of the organization growled. "Because I don't have a 4-year-old mind. I have a condition you never bothered to investigate." Ember paused, letting the revelation hang in the air. "I am what doctors call a gifted child with accelerated cognitive development. My mind functions at levels equivalent to a teenager, but in a small child's body." The silence that followed was absolute. Every piece of the puzzle began to fall into place in the millionaire's mind. The supernatural observation skills, the photographic memory, the ability to plan complex strategies. It all made sense now. "My mother discovered this when I was 2 years old," Ember continued. "That's why she refused to use me in your scheme. She knew I understood exactly what was happening and that it would cause me deep trauma. And that's why they committed her," the millionaire murmured, finally understanding the whole situation. "Exactly. But what you didn't know is that during those 2 years, I was consciously collecting evidence, planning my revenge, and waiting for the right moment to act." The boss took a few steps back, clearly shaken by the revelation. You manipulated us from the beginning." "I learned from the best," Ember replied with a smile that didn't match her childish appearance. "You taught me that desperate and lonely people are the easiest targets. So I found the most desperate and lonely man I knew and offered him exactly what he needed." The millionaire felt a complex mix of emotions. "You used me?" "At first, yes. But something changed." Ember's expression softened slightly. "I discovered that you really care about me. Not as a tool or a charity project, but as a person. That was something I had never experienced before. So all of this was an elaborate act? The revenge was planned, but the feelings became real. Ember looked directly into his eyes. You became the first person in my life who made me feel safe and loved. That's why I decided I would save you too, not just my mother. At that moment, sirens began to sound in the distance. The sound grew rapidly, indicating that multiple vehicles were approaching the park. The authorities, Ember smiled. I programmed the automatic release to happen 3 hours after we left the house, not 6. Lying about the time limit was just to make sure you wouldn't try anything desperate. The boss and his men looked around, realizing they were cornered. Police cars surrounded the park on all sides, and officers began to emerge from the vehicles in bulletproof vests. You destroyed everything, the leader of the organization said, with pure hatred in his voice. No, Ember corrected calmly. I fixed everything. All the families you destroyed will have justice. All the stolen money will be returned, and my mother will finally be able to come home. As the officers approached to make the arrests, Ember transformed back into the small, scared child she appeared to be. She ran into the millionaire's arms, trembling as if all the previous bravado had been just a dream. Is it over? She asked in a small, vulnerable voice. It's over, he confirmed, hugging her tightly. You were amazing, braver than any adult I know. But as they watched the boss and his henchmen being taken into custody, the businessman couldn't help but wonder how many other layers of that extraordinary mind were still hidden. The child who had saved his life and honored the memory of his wife was simultaneously the most innocent and the most complex person he had ever known. And now, with the criminal organization finally destroyed, the most important question of all remained. What would their future together look like, now that the truth had been completely revealed? 2 weeks had passed since the arrests in the park, and the millionaire's life had changed in ways he never could have imagined. The luxurious mansion, which for 2 years had been a silent mausoleum of painful memories, now echoed with voices, laughter, and an energy he had forgotten existed. Ember was officially under his temporary care while the authorities worked to locate and free her real mother. The process was being complicated by years of falsified documentation and the resistance of some corrupt employees at the private clinic, but the attorneys hired by the businessman were making steady progress. She's in a clinic 3 hours from here, his lead attorney reported during a morning meeting, but the doctors who committed her forged a very convincing psychiatric history. It will take time to prove that it was all fabricated. How long? The millionaire asked, watching through the office window where Ember was playing in the garden with a naturalness that touched him deeply. Maybe a few months, but we have solid evidence now. The recordings she collected include explicit conversations about the forced commitment. During these weeks of waiting, something extraordinary had happened between the businessman and the child. The layers of manipulation and planning that had characterized the beginning of their relationship gave way to a genuine and profound connection. She no longer needed to pretend to be just a vulnerable child, and he no longer needed to emotionally protect himself from the outside world. "Do you miss your old life?" Ember asked one afternoon as she helped him organize papers in the office with an efficiency that continued to surprise him. "What old life?" he replied, genuinely confused. "When you were just a rich and lonely man with no responsibilities." The millionaire paused to consider the question. "That wasn't a life. It was just existence. Now I have a purpose. Taking care of me? Not just that. You showed me there's more to the world than just my own pain. You taught me that sometimes the smallest people can have the bravest hearts." Ember smiled, but there was a shadow of concern in her eyes. "And when my mother comes back, will you want me to go away with her?" The question hit the businessman like a punch to the gut. During the weeks they had spent together, he had avoided thinking about this possibility. Ember had become so central to his life that imagining the house empty again was almost unbearable. Your mother is your real family, he said carefully. She loves you and sacrificed everything to protect you. That's who you should be with. But what if there's a way for us all to stay together? Before he could answer, the phone rang urgently. It was the attorney, with news that would change everything once again. "We found her!" the excited voice said on the other end of the line. "Ember's mother is conscious, mentally stable, and desperate to see her daughter. But there's something you need to know." "What?" "She's not who you think she is." An hour later, they were in the car, traveling toward the private clinic on the outskirts of town. Ember was visibly nervous, clenching her small hands in her lap as she watched the landscape pass by the window. "Are you afraid to see her?" the millionaire asked. "I'm afraid she's changed. 2 years is a long time in a mental clinic, even for someone who wasn't really sick. And if she wants to take you away from here immediately." Ember looked at him with that unsettling seriousness that characterized her most honest moments. "I'd try to convince her to stay, or at least to let you be part of our life." The clinic was a modern but somber building, surrounded by manicured gardens that couldn't disguise the oppressive atmosphere of the place. They were greeted by a psychiatrist who had taken over the case after the corrupt doctors were removed. "The patient is waiting in the visiting room," the doctor explained. "I need to warn you that she has experienced significant trauma during the forced commitment, but mentally, she's completely lucid and eager to reunite with her daughter." When they entered the visiting room, the millionaire had a shock that left him speechless. The woman who rose from the chair was younger than he had expected, with dark hair and eyes that were adult versions of Ember's expressive eyes. But there was something else that left him completely disturbed. She was almost identical to his late wife. "My little warrior," the woman said with a choked voice, opening her arms to her daughter. Ember ran into the embrace, and mother and daughter hugged with an intensity that brought tears to the millionaire's eyes. It was a moment of pure and emotional reunion that made all the suffering of the past years seem worthwhile. But when the woman looked over her daughter's head and her eyes met his, the expression that crossed her face was one of total shock. "It's not possible," she murmured. "You're the man who took care of our daughter," Ember finished, pulling away slightly from the embrace. "Mom, there's something important you need to know about him." Ember's mother walked slowly toward the millionaire, studying every detail of his face as if she were seeing a ghost. "Your name is really—" she began, but her voice faltered. "I own the company where you worked 3 years ago," he said, trying to process the disturbing familiarity of this woman. "But we never met in person." "No, we never met, but I know you very well." The woman turned to Ember. "Honey, you didn't tell him, did you?" "Tell him what?" Ember asked, confused. "About who I really am, about why you chose him specifically to help." The millionaire felt the world begin to spin around him. "What are you talking about?" Ember's mother took a deep breath, preparing for a revelation that would change everything forever. "I'm the twin sister of your late wife. We were separated as babies and raised by different families. I never knew I had a sister until I started investigating the criminal organization and discovered they had killed a woman who looked exactly like me." The silence that followed was deafening. The businessman looked from the woman to Ember, trying to process the implications of this impossible revelation. "That means—" he began. "That means," Ember said in a small voice, "that you're taking care of the niece of the woman you loved. And that maybe, just maybe, this isn't just a coincidence." The revelation about the true identity of Ember's mother completely shook the millionaire. He sat down heavily in a chair in the visiting room, trying to process the implications of a coincidence that seemed impossible to be just chance. "How is this possible?" he murmured, looking alternately at the woman who was a living version of his late wife, and at the child who had become so central to his life. Ember's mother sat down across from him, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to organize years of secrets and revelations. When I discovered I had a twin sister, I also found out that she had married a wealthy businessman and that they were both being targeted by the same organization that was forcing me to use my daughter for espionage, she began in a measured voice. I tried to find a way to warn her about the danger, but before I could make direct contact, she was already gone. The businessman leaned forward, absorbing every word. Your wife was investigating the organization at the same time as you? Not just investigating. She had found out about my existence through the documents she managed to access. She was trying to find me so we could work together. The woman paused, tears streaming down her face. In the last recording she made, before the accident, she mentions a lost sister who needed to save a small child. Ember, who had remained quiet during this exchange, finally spoke in her clear and direct voice. I knew from the beginning, she said, startling both adults. When I saw you for the first time that day in the woods, I recognized traces of my mother's face in you. I didn't completely understand it at the time, but I knew there was a connection. How can a 4-year-old recognize such subtle familial similarities? Asked the millionaire, still struggling to accept the reality of the situation. Because my photographic memory includes very specific facial details, and because my mother always showed me pictures of the aunt she was looking for. Ember looked at her mother. You showed me pictures of the late wife you found in the company files, remember? The mother nodded slowly. I didn't know you had connected everything so precisely. Is that why you chose me specifically? The businessman asked, addressing Ember. Because you knew about the family connection? Not just for that reason, she answered honestly. I chose you because you were suffering the same way my mother was suffering. Because I saw something in your pain that I recognized, something that needed to be healed. The conversation was interrupted by the psychiatrist, who knocked on the door and entered with a serious expression on his face. Sorry to interrupt, but there are some legal issues we need to resolve, he said, addressing primarily Ember's mother. The documents for your commitment have all been deemed fraudulent, and you are free to leave the clinic immediately. But there are questions about the custody of the child that need to be clarified. The millionaire felt a knot in his stomach. What kind of questions? Well, technically, the child has been under your temporary care for the past few weeks, but now that the biological mother has been released and deemed mentally capable, the doctor paused, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. The law requires that the child be immediately returned to maternal custody. Does that mean I have to go away now? Ember asked, her voice laden with anxiety. Her mother knelt in front of her, holding her small hands. Honey, do you want to come home with me? I've gotten a small apartment in a nearby town. We can start a new life, just the two of us. Ember looked between her mother and the millionaire, clearly torn between deep loyalties and complex feelings. I want to be with you, Mom. I dreamed about it every day during these 2 years. Her voice grew softer. But he's become my family too. I don't want to lose him after just finding you again. The businessman felt his heart break. The last thing he wanted was to separate mother and daughter after everything they had been through. But the idea of returning to his previous solitary existence seemed unbearable. Maybe there's a solution that works for everyone, Ember's mother said, looking thoughtfully between her daughter and the businessman. A solution that honors both our family ties and the connections that have formed during these difficult months. What kind of solution, he asked. You have a house that's too big for one person. I need to rebuild my life completely, but I don't have the resources or financial stability after 2 years in the clinic. The woman paused, clearly nervous about what she was about to propose. And our daughter needs stability, and all the people who love her around her. Ember looked up, immediately understanding where the conversation was going. Are you suggesting we all live together? I'm suggesting we consider forming an unconventional but genuine family, the mother said. If you're willing, she looked at the millionaire, and if it's what our daughter really wants. The businessman was silent for a long moment, processing the proposal. The idea of sharing his house with the twin sister of his late wife seemed simultaneously comforting and disturbing. It would be like having a piece of his wife back, but also a constant reminder of his loss. "It wouldn't be fair to you," he said finally. "I'm still dealing with the loss of your sister, seeing you every day." "It would be difficult for me too," she admitted. "But maybe we can help each other heal. Maybe we can honor her memory by creating something positive together." "What about me?" Ember asked. "No one is asking what I want." Both adults turned to her, realizing they had been discussing her future without directly including her in the decision. "What do you want, honey?" her mother asked. Ember got up and walked to the window of the visiting room, looking out at the clinic gardens as she organized her thoughts with the maturity that always surprised the adults around her. "I want a family," she said finally. "A real family, where no one uses anyone, where no one lies or manipulates, where people care about each other because they choose to care, not because they have to." She turned to them, her eyes shining with tears that she had never allowed to fall during all the months of suffering. "Mom, I love you, and I dreamed of having you back every day. But these months with him have shown me what it's like to have someone who cares about me without wanting something in return." She looked at the millionaire. "And you've shown me that it's possible to be kind and strong at the same time. That it's possible to take care of someone just because you want them to be happy." "So you want us all to stay together?" the businessman asked. "I want us to try," she replied. "Not as an obligation or because we have no other options, but because we choose to be a family." Ember's mother approached the millionaire, extending her hand in a formal gesture. "My name is Marina," she said, "and I'd very much like to meet the man who saved my daughter and honored my sister's memory." He shook her hand, feeling for the first time since the revelation a sense of possibility instead of just shock. "And I'd like to meet the woman who raised such an extraordinary daughter," he replied. 3 days later, they were back at the luxurious mansion, this time as an official family unit. Marina had been hired as a financial consultant by the Millionaire's company, a position that recognized her analytical skills developed during years of observing complex criminal operations. Ember had chosen the room that was between her mother's room and the businessman's room, symbolically linking all parts of her new family. "Do you think it will work?" Marina asked one night as they watched Ember play in the garden under the house's exterior lights. "I don't know," admitted the millionaire, "but for the first time in 2 years, I have hope that it will. She is special, isn't she? Our daughter." "Extraordinary," he agreed. "And I think it's time we stopped being surprised by how intelligent and resilient she is." That night, Ember approached the 2 adults with a serious expression on her face. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Something I've discovered but haven't had the courage to talk about yet." They braced themselves for yet another revelation, already accustomed to the infinite layers of complexity that surrounded Ember. "What is it, honey?" Marina asked. "When I was collecting evidence against the organization, I discovered that they have more operations in other cities, places where other children like me are being used in the same way." The millionaire leaned forward. "Do you have evidence of this?" "I do, and I think our family has a greater mission than just being happy together." Ember looked at both of them with determination. "I think we can help other families who are going through what we went through." It was a proposal that would change the course of their lives once again, but this time it was a change they would choose to make together as a family united by choice, shared trauma and genuine love. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time since their lives had intertwined so unexpectedly, they all had something to fight for that went beyond mere survival. 6 months had passed since the unconventional family had settled into the mansion, and the transformation had been remarkable. The house that once echoed only with silence and painful memories now vibrated with life, lively conversations, and a sense of purpose that none of the 3 had experienced before. Marina had adapted surprisingly well to her new life. Her forced experience observing complex criminal operations had translated into an exceptional ability for financial analysis and fraud detection. In just a few months, she had completely reorganized the Millionaire's investments, increasing their profitability and creating new revenue streams that made his fortune even more solid. "Your investments in tech stocks are generating extraordinary profits," she reported during a morning meeting in the office. "And the investments in international funds are providing a diversification that protects our assets against local fluctuations." The businessman smiled as he heard Marina use the word "our." In the first months, she had been careful to maintain emotional and financial distance, but gradually she had begun to see herself as an integral part not only of the family, but also of the business. "What about the special project?" he asked, referring to the initiative that Ember had proposed. "It's progressing better than we expected. We've already identified 3 cities where operations similar to the one that affected us are active." Ember, who now officially went by the name of Sophia, a choice of her own to mark the beginning of her new life, was sitting in an armchair, adapted to her height, organizing documents with the efficiency of an executive secretary. "The evidence I collected about the other operations is being verified by the private investigators we hired," she said, her voice maintaining that disconcerting maturity. "But there's a problem we didn't anticipate." "What problem?" asked Marina, immediately alert. "Some of the children who are being used, they don't want to be saved." Sophia paused, choosing her words carefully. "For them, life on the streets with adults who exploit them is still better than any alternative they know." The millionaire frowned. "How so?" "Many of them were abandoned by families who couldn't or didn't want to take care of them. For these children, even manipulative adults represent the only form of safety and protection they know." Sophia looked out the office window, watching the manicured gardens that she now considered her home. "They're afraid that if the adults who take care of them are arrested, they'll end up completely alone." It was a complexity that none of them had adequately considered. Saving the families victimized by the criminal organizations was relatively straightforward, but dealing with children who had become dependent on the very systems that exploited them was a completely different challenge. "Then we need to offer real alternatives," Marina said thoughtfully. "Not just remove the children from situations of exploitation, but ensure they have safe places to go." "That will require far more resources than we originally planned," the businessman observed. "We're talking about creating a complete support infrastructure." Sophia got up and walked to the whiteboard they had installed in the office for their planning sessions. With precise movements, she began to draw a complex diagram showing the interrelationships between victims, perpetrators, and necessary support systems. "We can do this," she said confidently, "but it will require us to think in terms of years, not months. And it will require partnerships with people and organizations that share our vision." Over the following weeks, they began to implement an ambitious plan. Using the Millionaire's fortune as a base, they created a private foundation dedicated to combating family exploitation schemes and supporting vulnerable children. Marina used her analytical skills to identify and track suspicious operations, while Sophia, with her unique understanding of the mindset of both victims and perpetrators, developed intervention strategies. The first real operation took place in a coastal city 2 hours away. They had identified a network that used children to collect information about families of prosperous fishermen, specifically targeting widows and older men who lived alone. "It's almost identical to what happened to us," Marina observed as they reviewed the evidence. "They identify emotionally vulnerable people and then exploit that vulnerability through children who inspire sympathy and trust." "But there are important differences," Sophia noted, studying photographs and reports. "This operation is smaller, less sophisticated. They don't have infiltration into medical or financial institutions. It's mainly based on direct emotional manipulation. The millionaire had hired a team of private investigators and specialized attorneys, but he insisted on being personally involved in the process. For him, each family saved was a way to honor his wife's memory and repair, at least partially, the years he had spent ignoring signs of danger. The rescue operation was carefully coordinated. Instead of simply calling the authorities, they first established direct contact with the victimized families, offering support and resources to protect themselves. Simultaneously, they created safe alternatives for the 3 children involved in the scheme. The hardest part, Sophia explained at a team meeting, is convincing the kids that we're different from the other adults they've known, that we won't use them and then discard them when we don't need them anymore. The process took nearly 2 months, but eventually they completely dismantled the criminal network while ensuring that all the children involved were placed in safe and loving homes. "One of them wants to meet you," Marina told Sophia after everything was settled. "A 6-year-old girl who says she wants to learn to be smart, like the girl who helped the families." Sophia was visibly moved. It was the first time another child had looked up to her as a role model or inspiration, instead of seeing her as a threat or competition. "Can I talk to her?" The meeting took place in the luxurious mansion's garden, discreetly supervised by the adults, but allowing the 2 children to converse freely. The older girl, who had lived through similar experiences to Sophia, asked direct questions about how to deal with nightmares, how to trust adults again, and how to use skills developed in bad situations to do good things. "Are you still scared sometimes?" the younger child asked. "I am," Sophia admitted honestly, "but now when I'm scared, I know I have people who truly protect me, and I know I can protect other people too." "How?" "By using everything I've learned. All the skills I had to develop to survive, I now use to help others not have to go through what I went through." That conversation marked a fundamental shift in Sophia's self-perception. She began to see her experiences not just as trauma to be overcome, but as unique tools that qualified her for a very specific type of social work. In the following months, more operations were planned and executed. Each brought new challenges and learnings, but also confirmed that the model they had developed was effective. They weren't just saviors arriving from the outside. They were survivors who intimately understood both the mechanisms of exploitation and the paths to recovery. "We're making a real difference," the millionaire observed one night, as the 3 of them reviewed reports about the families they had helped. "More than that," Marina said. "We're creating something sustainable, a model that other people can replicate." Sophia, who was drawing blueprints for a support center they wanted to build, looked up from the paper. "You know what else makes me happy," she said, "is that we're not just fixing bad things, we're building good things." It was an important distinction. Instead of being defined only by their losses and traumas, they had chosen to be defined by their abilities to create, protect, and nurture. But there was still one final revelation waiting, one that would connect all the threads of their journey in a way that none of them could have anticipated. "There's something I need to tell you," Sophia said one morning, with that serious expression that usually preceded her most important revelations. "Something I've discovered about myself during these months helping other children." Marina and the millionaire stopped what they were doing, already accustomed to the fact that Sophia always had additional layers of complexity to reveal. "What did you discover?" Marina asked gently. "I discovered why my memory and my abilities are so different from other children, why I can process information and make connections that others can't." Sophia paused, organizing her thoughts. "And I've discovered something about our family that explains a lot about how we got here." The businessman leaned forward. "What kind of discovery?" "A discovery that will change how we understand not only my past but also the future of our work together." The final revelation was about to once again transform their understanding of themselves and the extraordinary bonds that had united them into such an improbable yet powerful family. Sophia's final revelation happened on a golden autumn afternoon, exactly 1 year after the first meeting in the woods that had changed all their lives. They were gathered in the office of the luxurious mansion, surrounded by reports from all the families they had helped, photographs of children who now lived in safe homes, and stacks of thank-you notes from people whose lives had been transformed by their work. During these months, helping other children, I began to understand things about myself that I had never understood before, Sophia began, her small hands carefully organizing some medical documents she had obtained, especially after talking with psychologists specializing in gifted children. Marina leaned forward, intrigued. What kind of things? My condition is rarer than we thought. I'm not just a child with accelerated intelligence. I have something doctors call acquired savant syndrome, combined with exceptional cognitive development. Sophia paused, making sure they were both keeping up. That means my brain processes and stores information completely differently from other people. The millionaire frowned. Acquired? That means you weren't born this way? Exactly. The condition developed as a response to the extreme traumas I experienced in the first years of my life. My brain literally reorganized itself to give me survival tools that a normal child wouldn't have. She showed them some medical reports. That's why I can remember every detail, why I can analyze complex behavioral patterns, and why I developed such advanced manipulation and strategy skills. Marina covered her mouth with her hands, clearly shaken. You're saying that all the suffering you went through literally changed the structure of your brain? Yes. But here's the most important part, Sophia said, her eyes shining with an intensity they hadn't seen before. This same condition isn't just about survival, it's about transformation. I can use these skills not only to protect myself, but to protect other people in ways that normal people can't. How so? The businessman asked. I can identify patterns of abuse and manipulation that are almost imperceptible to others. I can understand the motivations of criminals because my mind works similarly in some ways. And more importantly, she paused dramatically, I can teach other children who have experienced similar traumas to develop their own special abilities. The revelation was impressive, but there was something more in Sophia's expression that suggested she hadn't gotten to the main point yet. But there's more, isn't there? Marina asked, knowing her daughter's patterns of gradual revelation well. There is. Something about our family that I discovered during my medical research. Sophia took a deep breath. Mom, do you remember how you always knew you had a twin sister, even though you were separated as babies? I remember. I always had dreams and feelings about another person like me somewhere. And you, Sophia turned to the millionaire, always felt an immediate connection with me, even before you knew about the family relationship. From the first moment, he confirmed. It was as if I recognized something familiar in you. Sophia smiled, but it was a smile laden with deep emotion. That wasn't coincidence. Our family has a genetic predisposition to extremely strong empathetic connections. It's partially hereditary and partially developed through shared experiences of loss and trauma. She showed them scientific studies she had been reading. Families who go through significant tragedies sometimes develop what researchers call amplified neurological bonds. It's a form of evolutionary survival that allows family members to find and protect each other even in impossible circumstances. You're saying we were destined to meet? The millionaire asked, clearly moved by the possibility. I'm saying that our connection goes beyond coincidence or even luck. I'm saying that each of us developed special abilities as a result of our losses, and those abilities guided us to each other. Sophia got up and walked to the window, watching the garden where so many important conversations had taken place. Mom developed exceptional analytical skills as a way to survive in an impossible situation. You developed an intensified capacity for protection and care after losing your wife. And I developed observation and strategy skills as a response to abandonment and abuse. And together? Marina asked. Together, we form something that is much more powerful than any of us could be alone. A family that not only protects each other, but has the unique ability to protect other families too. The silence that followed was laden with emotion and understanding. Each of them processed the implications of what Sophia had revealed, not only about their personal connection, but about the broader meaning of their work together. So our work saving other families, the millionaire said slowly, isn't just charity or a sense of justice. It's our calling, Sophia completed. It's literally what we were made for. Every trauma we went through, every skill we developed, every connection we formed, it all prepared us for this purpose. Marina stood up and hugged her daughter, tears streaming down her face. You transformed our pain into purpose. We transformed, Sophia corrected. I couldn't have done it alone. In the months that followed this revelation, their work gained a completely new dimension. They were no longer just survivors helping other survivors. They were a specialized team with unique skills developed specifically for the type of work they were doing. The foundation they had created expanded dramatically. With a clear understanding of their special capabilities, they were able to develop intervention methods that were more effective than any traditional approach. Marina became an expert in detecting complex financial irregularities. The millionaire developed an almost supernatural instinct for identifying people in emotionally vulnerable situations, and Sophia became the youngest specialized consultant in child trauma psychology in the country. More importantly, they began to find other families with similar histories, people who had developed exceptional skills as a result of trauma and who were looking for ways to use those skills to help others. We're creating a network, Marina observed, during a meeting with other families who had joined their work. A network of people who have transformed their worst experiences into their greatest strengths. The support center they built became a model replicated in several cities. But unlike other charities, they didn't focus solely on providing basic resources. They focused on identifying and developing the special skills that many traumatized children developed as survival mechanisms. Every child who has gone through extreme trauma has developed some kind of survival superpower, Sophia explained in lectures she had begun to give to mental health professionals. The trick isn't to try to make these children go back to normal. It's to help them understand and channel their special abilities in positive and constructive ways. 2 years after the final revelation, they had helped more than 100 families and transformed the lives of more than 200 children. But for Sophia, Marina, and the millionaire, the most important success wasn't in the numbers. You know what I'm most proud of? Sophia said one night, as the three of them dined together in the luxurious mansion's garden. It's that we didn't just survive, we thrived, and we did it without losing our humanity or our capacity to love. And without forgetting where we came from, added Marina. Each family we help reminds us of our own journey. The millionaire looked at his two most important women, one who carried the face of his lost wife, and the other who carried the wisdom of an old soul in a child's body, and felt a deep gratitude that went beyond words. You know what I find most extraordinary about our story, he said. What? They asked in unison. It's that it started with what seemed like the worst possible thing. A kidnapping, manipulation, loss, trauma. But it turned into the best thing that's ever happened in our lives, Sophia smiled. That radiant smile that illuminated not only her face, but the entire environment around her. That's because we learned life's most important secret, she said. No matter how bad things get, there's always a way to transform pain into love, trauma into strength, and losses into achievements. You just need to have the courage to believe that that transformation is possible, and to have the right people by your side, added Marina. And never give up hope that tomorrow can be better than today, concluded the millionaire. That night, as the family prepared to sleep in their home filled with love and purpose, Sophia made one last drawing in her notebook. It was a simple image, 3 figures holding hands under a starry sky, surrounded by dozens of other smaller figures, representing all the people they had helped. In the center of the drawing, she wrote a single word: family. Not family by blood or by chance, but family by choice, by love, and by a shared purpose that had transformed 3 broken lives into something beautiful, powerful, and lasting. And so, a story that had begun with a desperate child, a man destroyed by loss, and a woman unjustly imprisoned, transformed into a narrative of hope, redemption, and unconditional love that would continue to grow and impact lives for many years to come. The girl who once lived on the streets now slept safely in a house filled with love. The man who had lost everything had found a new family that filled his heart in ways he never imagined possible. And the woman who had been separated from her daughter was now not only reunited with her, but had found a purpose that gave meaning to all the years of suffering. They had learned that sometimes the best families aren't those we are born into, but those we build through courageous choices, unconditional love, and the determination to transform our greatest pains into our greatest strengths. And that was a lesson they would continue to teach, through their work and through their own lives, to anyone willing to believe that even the darkest stories can have truly happy endings. If you enjoyed this wonderful story, please comment, giving a rating from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important, and if you love beautiful stories, subscribe to my channel. I promise to make your day better with my videos.